A quiet electoral sweep in Budapest, 7,000 kilometers from Ottawa, just hardwired $146 billion strategic dividend into Canada's economy. Almost nobody noticed. While mainstream pundits recycled domestic headlines, the architect of a 16-year nationalist blockade inside the European Union, Viktor Orbán, was decisively removed from power. That single result dismantled the exact diplomatic obstruction holding Canadian trade, energy exports, and multilateral leverage hostage for over a decade. Here's what I'm laying out for you today, a framework called the Sovereign Leverage Cascade, a precise, non-partisan map connecting this distant political earthquake to three massive unlocks for Canada: trade, energy, geopolitical positioning. Stay with me through this, because by the end you'll have the evidence and the language to walk into any room and articulate exactly why this moment matters more than anything on the front page right now. So, how does one country's change of government trigger a chain reaction across an entire continent and land squarely in Canada's lap? It starts with the sheer scale of what happened. On April 13th, 2026, a 45-year-old lawyer named Peter Magyar and his pro-European TISZA party didn't just win Hungary's election, they obliterated it. 138 out of 199 parliamentary seats, a two-thirds supermajority. According to BBC News and Reuters, this definitively ended Viktor Orbán's 16-year grip on power. And a supermajority changes everything, because it means zero coalition compromises, no backroom deals, no watered-down legislation, no months of parliamentary drag. Magyar has the mandate to rewrite Hungary's entire foreign policy orientation without asking anyone's permission. And he started immediately. Within 24 hours of the results, Magyar had spoken personally with 10 European leaders, France, Germany, EU leadership, NATO. Congratulations didn't trickle in. They flooded. And when a new head of state makes 10 strategic alignment calls in a single day, the Western alliance system is activating in real time. Stay with me, because the speed tells the whole story. For 16 years, Orbán wielded Hungary's EU and NATO veto like a wrench jammed into the gears of Western consensus. He blocked Ukraine aid packages. He stalled collective sanctions against Russia. He single-handedly held 26 other nations hostage with one vote. The Council on Foreign Relations published their 26 analysis shortly after the election. Orbán's defeat, they concluded, closes the door on Russian geopolitical interference in Central Europe and, their words, dramatically elevates EU integration and foreign policy efficiency. The CFR doesn't use dramatically casually, so think bigger than a change of leadership. What happened on April 13th was the extraction of a 16-year-old obstruction from the arterial system of Western institutions. Now, here's where the cascade reaches Canada. Canada's ability to project economic and strategic power through energy exports, trade agreements, defense partnerships depends entirely on functional multilateral channels. When those channels are blocked by a single veto, Canadian leverage sits frozen regardless of how strong the underlying assets are. The moment Magyar's supermajority cleared that obstruction, three massive pathways snapped open simultaneously. Trade, energy, geopolitical positioning. That's the sovereign leverage cascade in motion. One structural shift at the source and pressure releases downstream directly into Canada's strategic reservoir. The first pathway to crack open, a trade agreement worth tens of billions that's been sitting frozen for nearly a decade, held hostage by a single country. You can probably guess which one. CETA, the Canada-EU Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement. Since its provisional launch in 2017, the numbers have been staggering. Bilateral goods trade up 75%, services trade surging 97%, and 99% of tariffs between Canada and the European Union eliminated. Those figures come straight from the European Commission and Global Affairs Canada, and they represent what CETA accomplished while running on provisional status, essentially a trial period with no guaranteed future. Here's what most people miss. CETA is not primarily a tariff document. It's a legal shield. It governs investment protections, government procurement access, regulatory standards. For a Canadian company trying to bid on a municipal infrastructure contract in Germany or set up operations in the Netherlands, CETA is the legal architecture that guarantees their rights won't evaporate overnight. Without full ratification, that architecture sits on a temporary foundation. Every contract, every cross-border investment carries an invisible asterisk, subject to cancellation if ratification fails. So why hasn't it been fully ratified? Because out of 27 EU member states, 10 refused to complete the process. 17 approved it, 10 did not. And the most vocal, most strategically positioned holdout was Hungary. Under Orbán, Budapest turned CETA ratification into a political bargaining chip, leveraging it against Brussels on completely unrelated disputes over rule of law conditions and migration policy. One government's posturing held 450 million consumers worth of permanent market access just out of Canada's legal reach. Now connect the dots, April 13th. Magyar wins with a constitutional supermajority. His government pivots Hungary toward pro-EU consensus. That single political shift doesn't just remove one vote from the holdout column, it dismantles the political cover that other reluctant states were hiding behind. Hungary was the anchor of resistance. Cut the anchor, and the remaining holdouts lose their coalition logic. The timing tells you everything. Canadian Trade Minister Maninder Sidhu and EU Trade Commissioner Maroš Šefčovič recently signed an enhanced CETA agreement in Toronto and launched next-generation digital trade negotiations. They're already building on top of a ratification they now see as inevitable. When both sides start negotiating the expansion before the foundation is formally sealed, they're signaling one thing clearly: the bottleneck is gone. So what does permanent ratification actually deliver? Legal certainty for every Canadian exporter, investor, and service provider operating in Europe. The asterisk disappears. Contracts become enforceable under international law with no expiration threat. Procurement markets that were technically accessible but practically risky become fully secured. That is the first tier of the Sovereign Leverage Cascade locked into place. But stay with me, because if you think unlocking a 450 million person trade corridor is the headline story here, you're only seeing the surface layer. The second tier of this cascade doesn't touch commerce at all. It reaches into something far more consequential: the transatlantic security architecture that underpins the defense of an entire continent. 90 billion euros. That's roughly 146 billion Canadian dollars. In March 2026, the Orbán government single-handedly blocked that entire sum, a unified EU aid package for Ukraine, using one procedural weapon, the unanimity veto. The stated dispute? Bilateral grievances over Russian oil pipeline access. Not collective security, not strategic alignment, pipeline politics. Understand the architecture here. The European Union's foreign policy decisions require unanimous consent from all member states, every single one, which means any government willing to act in bad faith holds an effective kill switch over the entire alliance's defense posture. For years, the Orbán regime operated exactly like a Trojan horse inside that system. Nominally an ally, functionally a blockade. One seat at the table paralyzing 26 others. For Canada, this dysfunction was never abstract. Our financial and military commitments to NATO's eastern flank and to Ukraine are substantial. And when EU consensus fractures, the burden doesn't vanish. It redistributes. It lands disproportionately on transatlantic partners still willing to act. Partners like Canada. Every euro Brussels couldn't deploy was $1. Ottawa had to stretch further to maintain credible deterrence. Every delayed weapons shipment created a gap that coalition partners scrambled to fill. The Trojan horse didn't just block European money, it inflated Canadian costs. That was the operating environment until April 2026. Magyar's supermajority removed the single most destructive friction point in European collective defense. The International Crisis Group now forecasts that his administration will immediately unblock the delayed Ukraine aid, restoring EU foreign policy consensus and drastically improving collective defense efficiency. EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen put it plainly. Hungary chose Europe. And Magyar himself confirmed he will not initiate contact with Vladimir Putin or Donald Trump, a clean, unambiguous severing of the Orbán playbook. Connect the dots for Canada. When Allied friction evaporates, the entire cost structure of maintaining the rules-based international order shifts downward. Canadian defense commitments become more efficient. Dollar for dollar, they buy more security. Our foreign aid reaches its intended destination through coordinated multilateral channels instead of compensatory bilateral patches we had to improvise around the blockade. That $146 billion held hostage, it flows, and that flow stabilizes the very international architecture protecting Canadian global operations, from Arctic sovereignty claims to Pacific shipping lanes. One election, years of institutional paralysis dissolved. But stay with me, because everything we've covered so far, the trade corridor and the defense reset, they're both clearing the path for something with a much shorter expiration date. There is an energy vacuum forming across Europe right now. It has a hard deadline, it has staggering numbers attached to it, and Canada happens to be sitting on the exact resource to fill it. The clock on this one is already running. The Council of the European Union has formally adopted regulations enforcing a full ban on Russian LNG imports by early 2027, with all remaining pipeline gas phased out by autumn of that same year. That's not aspirational language. That's binding EU statute. And here's the direct causal link to everything we just covered. Hungary was the single loudest voice inside the EU defending continued Russian energy dependence. With Orbán's political infrastructure dismantled and Magyar's pro-European supermajority seated, the last meaningful internal resistance to enforcing that 2027 deadline has evaporated. Europe's energy divorce from Moscow just shifted from politically contested to legislatively irreversible. The infrastructure to capture this window already exists, and it's Canadian. On the west coast of British Columbia, in the remote coastal town of Kitimat, sits one of the most strategically consequential energy terminals being built anywhere on Earth right now. LNG Canada's Kitimat facility is scheduled to begin shipping Phase 1 volumes by mid-2025. 14 million tons of liquefied natural gas per year, but a terminal's only as powerful as the system feeding it. Connecting northeast British Columbia's gas fields to Kitimat is the Coastal Gas Link pipeline. Hundreds of kilometers of steel driven through some of the most rugged mountain terrain on the continent. The combined development represents a multi-billion-dollar capital investment, one of the largest private infrastructure projects in Canadian history, and critically, it was de-risked through extensive partnership agreements with Indigenous and First Nations communities along the pipeline corridor, a governance model that no competing LNG jurisdiction has replicated at anywhere near this scale. Phase 2 is already in motion. When fully operational, Kitimat alone will push 28 million tons of LNG annually into global markets. And Kitimat is just the flagship. Canada's total LNG export potential reaches 100 million tons per year. Figures confirmed by LNG Canada and CBC News. Now, Kitimat sits on the Pacific coast, not the Atlantic. It doesn't ship directly to Rotterdam, but that's not how global LNG markets actually clear. Canadian volumes flowing into Asian markets displace existing Pacific Basin suppliers, who then redirect uncommitted cargoes toward European terminals hungry for non-Russian supply. Every ton of Canadian LNG entering the Pacific effectively frees up equivalent volume for European buyers. an indirect route with a direct strategic consequence, pin those numbers against the regulatory clock. The EU's full Russian LNG ban activates early 2027. Kitimat Phase 2 scales across that exact window. The supply curve and the demand curve are synchronized to within months of each other. You almost couldn't engineer a tighter convergence if you sat down with a calendar and tried. But tonnage alone doesn't explain why this registers at the level of grand strategy. Multiple countries export LNG at massive scale. Qatar, the United States, Australia. So what makes Canadian supply categorically different when European procurement officials are deciding who replaces Russia? The nature of the supplier itself. Canada is a NATO ally, a G7 democracy, a jurisdiction with transparent contract enforcement, rule of law, and here's the decisive variable: zero track record of weaponizing energy exports for geopolitical coercion. Stay with me on why that's not just a nice talking point. The United States has already demonstrated willingness to pause LNG export approvals for domestic political reasons, the kind of supply-side volatility European planners cannot afford to build long-term dependency around. Qatar operates at enormous scale, but from a region defined by authoritarian governance and chronic geopolitical friction. When European energy ministers evaluate supply chains routed through Canadian infrastructure, they see more than hydrocarbons. They see what strategic analysts have precisely described as supply that cannot be turned off by politics or coercion. That characteristic transforms Canadian natural gas from a commodity into a sovereign instrument. It's the gap between a continent buying fuel and a continent buying structural freedom from authoritarian leverage. In a post-2027 Europe that has legally committed to permanent independence from Russian energy, that distinction commands a strategic premium no standard pricing model captures. This is the third pillar of the Sovereign Leverage Cascade, and arguably its most consequential. CETA built the commercial corridor. The defense reset improved our multilateral efficiency. Energy hands Canada something qualitatively different: structural influence over the security architecture of an entire continent. Now I want your assessment. Do you think Canada is structurally ready, with projects like Kitimat on the timeline they're on, to fully replace Russia as Europe's primary energy guarantor by 2027? Tell me your fate on our infrastructure capacity in the comments. But before you answer that, sit with something deeply uncomfortable for a moment. Every dollar figure, every tonnage number, every strategic advantage I've just mapped for you traces back to a single event. One election, in one country that Canada had absolutely zero control over. If the entire architecture of our sovereign leverage depends on the voters of Budapest making a particular choice on a particular Sunday, then what we've constructed here isn't sovereign leverage at all. It's a house standing on someone else's foundation. And that fragility changes everything about what comes next. And the proof arrived almost immediately. Within days of his April 26 victory, Peter Magyar, the man Western media was busy crowning as Europe's great democratic renewal, did something that should have frozen every celebration mid-toast. He confirmed publicly and without hesitation that Hungary would continue blocking EU sanctions against Israel, and he signaled firm resistance to any fast-tracked EU accession path for Ukraine. Euronews, The National, Politico, they all reported it. Barely anyone connected the dots to what it actually means. Stay with me here, because this is where the entire picture shifts. Under Viktor Orbán, the playbook was familiar. He weaponized Hungary's veto to block Ukraine funding packages, stall EU defense coordination, and hold Brussels hostage on migration policy. Year after year, the world watched. The world complained. And when Magyar swept him from power on a pro-European platform, the comfortable assumption, the dangerously lazy assumption, was that the obstruction era died with Orbán's government. It didn't. Magyar simply redirected the same weapon at different targets, different policy files, same mechanism, same structural leverage. One leader blocked Ukraine aid, his replacement blocks Israel sanctions, and Ukraine's fast-track membership. The hand on the trigger changed, the gun didn't. And this is the insight that changes everything about how we read this situation. The problem was never Viktor Orbán. Orbán was a symptom. The underlying condition is the EU's unanimity requirement itself, a constitutional architecture that hands any single member state, regardless of size or population, the legal authority to hijack foreign policy, trade agreements, and security frameworks for the entire 27-nation bloc. Now connect that directly to Canada's position. CETA's ratification required unanimity. European defense procurement coordination requires unanimity. Energy security frameworks require unanimity. Every single pillar of the sovereign leverage cascade we've mapped runs through this identical choke point, a single narrow gate where one dissenting voice carries the same weight as 26 aligned ones. The $146 billion dividend is real. I stand behind every number, but its permanence depends on 27 governments across 27 election cycles with 27 sets of domestic political pressures, all continuously choosing not to pull the emergency brake. That arithmetic doesn't describe a strategy. It describes a coin flip repeated indefinitely. And the mainstream framing right now? It treats Magyar's victory as mission accomplished. Democracy restored, Europe reunited, crisis resolved. That reading is strategically illiterate. What actually happened is that Canada received a window, a temporary alignment where the specific vetoes threatening our core interests happened to be lifted. The mechanism that generated those vetoes, however, sits fully intact, loaded, and available to whichever government in Budapest or Warsaw or Rome or any European capital decides that transatlantic obstruction has become electorally profitable. So the real question, the one that separates spectators from sovereign strategists, was never who wins the next European election. The question is this: how does Canada exploit this narrow, favorable window to push for permanent architectural reform so that our trade, our energy leverage, and our security partnerships can never again be held hostage by a single foreign ballot box? That answer exists, and it demands a kind of strategic play that Canada has never once attempted. Here it is. Canada takes the CETA renegotiation table, the very deal that was frozen for years, and transforms it into a bilateral pressure instrument to actively back the European Commission's push to replace unanimity voting with qualified majority voting in EU foreign policy. Stay with me because the mechanics matter. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has explicitly stated, Politico, April 16, 2026, that the Hungarian election results provide crucial momentum to change EU decision-making rules, to finally end the national veto in foreign policy. That momentum is real, but momentum without external reinforcement fades. Von der Leyen needs allies outside the EU to make this reform politically survivable inside the EU. Canada becomes that ally. Step 1. Canadian policymakers enter the CETA ratification discussions with a clear, stated preference. Any deepened trade relationship must be anchored in institutional stability, in durable rules, regardless of the political weather in Budapest or Warsaw next year. Step 2. Canada makes its support for expanded CETA provisions, agricultural market access, digital trade frameworks, regulatory harmonization, explicitly conditional on the EU demonstrating credible progress toward qualified majority voting in foreign and trade policy. This reframes the entire negotiation. Canada stops asking for favors. Canada starts offering structural partnership. Step 3. Coordinate with like-minded EU member states, the Nordics, the Baltics, the Netherlands, who have quietly pushed for QMV for years but lack the external catalyst to force the issue. A major G7 trade partner saying, we need institutional reliability before we deepen integration, gives reformers inside Brussels exactly the political cover they have been waiting for. Now connect the dots on the payoff. If qualified majority voting replaces unanimity in EU foreign policy, no single member state can ever again hold CETA hostage. No single government can block Ukraine aid packages that protect the security corridor Canada's defense industry depends on. No single veto can freeze LNG infrastructure deals worth billions in Canadian energy exports. The $146 billion Sovereign Leverage Cascade stops being a coin flip dependent on one country's election night. It becomes structural, permanent, insulated from the domestic politics of any individual European capital. Every trade agreement carries influence far beyond its tariff schedules. Every energy project carries leverage far beyond its supply lines. And for the first time, Canada would be deploying both simultaneously to permanently reshape the multilateral architecture that determines whether its strategic dividends survive the next populist wave across the continent. That is the sovereign leverage cascade, fully realized. That is the deeper picture most analysts are missing entirely. If this kind of nonpartisan, evidence-driven geopolitical framework is the discourse you want in your feed, share this video with your professional network. Send it to the colleague who is still reading surface-level headlines about Hungary, and subscribe, because we are going to keep connecting these global shifts to Canada's sovereign positioning before the windows close.